In the year 1580, inside a Spanish colony that was barely a decade old, a widow stood accused of a crime that could unravel her family, her name, and her freedom. The court papers that recorded her fate were locked away, copied in secret across 2 continents, and then one version of them vanished without explanation. For more than 400 years, almost no one outside a handful of archive researchers has ever heard her name. She was not a peasant. She was not an outsider. She was the widow of the 2nd Governor General of the Philippines, and the accusation against her involved ointments, curses, and a Chinese-made salt cellar that supposedly held the power to make grown men lose their minds. This is the true story of Doña Inés Álvarez de Gibraleón, the forgotten witch of colonial Manila, and the case that exposed how fear could be turned into a weapon by the very people sworn to stop it. To understand why this case mattered, you have to picture what Manila actually looked like in 1580. Spain had only just planted its flag on these islands. The city inside the walls was small, crowded, anxious, and deeply superstitious, filled with soldiers, friars, merchants, and colonial officials who were still trying to figure out how to survive so far from home. There was no formal Inquisition office yet stationed in the islands, which meant that when whispers of witchcraft began to spread, there was no established system built to handle them. Instead, ordinary priests and local judges were forced to improvise, turning themselves into makeshift investigators of the supernatural. That gap in the system is exactly where Doña Inés found herself trapped. Doña Inés Álvarez de Gibraleón was the widow of Guido de Lavezaris, a former governor of the Philippines, which placed her firmly among the colony's elite. She lived with a woman referred to in the records as her daughter, Ana de Monterrey, who was married to a captain named Juan de Moron. On the surface, this was a respectable household, the kind that should have been untouchable by scandal. But according to surviving testimony, something extraordinary happened while Doña Ana was going about her ordinary domestic chores. An event strange enough that it triggered a formal accusation of sorcery against both women almost immediately. What makes this case so striking is not just the accusation itself, but what it reportedly involved. According to church investigation records, Doña Inés was said to possess a livid ointment kept inside a glazed earthenware container crafted by Chinese artisans living in Manila's outlying district. She was also said to know of an oil stored in a small phial and a set of seeds resembling benzoin, a fragrant resin used in local healing and incense practices. When 2 colonists reportedly fell into a disturbed, frightened state, a friar overseeing the situation ordered Doña Inés to reverse whatever she had allegedly done. Under close watch, she is said to have applied the oil to their wrists and burned the seeds as one would burn incense. And the 2 colonists were said to have returned to their senses shortly afterward. That single moment, an accused woman ordered to undo her own supposed spell in front of witnesses, is the kind of scene that sounds almost too vivid to be real. But it comes from surviving archival testimony, not folklore invented centuries later. It is a detail historians studying the Spanish Philippines have only pieced together in the last few decades, buried inside records that traveled from Manila to Mexico City and were nearly lost to time. Because there was no Inquisition officially operating in the islands yet, church authorities had to investigate the matter as a possible case of heresy rather than witchcraft in the strict legal sense. That ecclesiastical investigation produced a written record that remarkably still survives today inside the National Archive in Mexico City, the administrative hub that oversaw Spain's Pacific colonies at the time. But that was only half of the story. At the very same time, the colony's newly arrived governor, Gonzalo Ronquillo de Peñalosa, opened a separate civil case against Ana de Monterrey and her husband, Captain Juan de Moron, treating the matter as a criminal offense under secular law rather than a purely spiritual one. Two parallel trials running at the same moment, investigating the same family under two entirely different legal systems. That alone tells you how seriously and how chaotically the young colony treated accusations like this. But here is where the story becomes something closer to a conspiracy than a simple witch trial. The papers from that civil case, the one overseen directly by the governor himself, disappeared under suspicious circumstances. Not lost to fire, not destroyed by weather or insects, but gone in a way that historians who have studied the case describe as deliberate. Why would an entire criminal case simply vanish from the historical record? The most compelling explanation researchers have put forward is that accusations of witchcraft in a small, tightly connected colonial society were rarely only about the supernatural. They were also about power, reputation, and personal rivalry. A widow connected to a former governor was not just an ordinary target. She represented influence, property, and standing within a colony where everyone with authority was jostling for position. When the surviving Mexican archive documents are cross-referenced with other Spanish records that do still exist, a pattern starts to emerge. One that suggests witchcraft accusations in early Manila could be quietly exploited by powerful figures looking to settle scores or seize advantage over rivals. Using fear of the occult as the perfect cover. This is where the story stops being a simple ghost tale and becomes something far more human. Fear of witchcraft was real to the people living through it, but it was also a tool. An accusation could ruin a family's standing overnight. It could remove a political obstacle without ever needing a formal, provable motive. And in a colony this new, this isolated, and this dependent on personal alliances to survive. That kind of weapon was incredibly dangerous in the wrong hands. To fully grasp why an accusation like this could spread so quickly, it helps to understand the world colonial Manila was built on top of. Long before Spanish ships ever reached these shores, Filipino communities already had their own deeply respected spiritual specialists, figures the Tagalog people called Catalonan. And other groups across the islands knew by different names, depending on the region. These individuals, often women, served as healers, spiritual guides, and community leaders, roles that carried genuine authority and respect. Spanish missionaries arriving in the late 1500s documented several categories of these practitioners, including one group referred to as Manggagawa, described in colonial writings as healers who could induce or cure illness through charms and herbal knowledge.
When Spanish colonizers encountered these traditions, they did not simply observe them with curiosity.
They filtered everything through a European lens shaped by centuries of witch panic back home. And in doing so, they recast local healers and spiritual leaders as something closer to European witches. Figures believed to draw power from dark, forbidden sources. This reframing served a very practical colonial purpose. By painting indigenous spiritual authority as dangerous sorcery, Spanish religious and civil authorities could justify dismantling the influence of local leaders and replacing it with their own control, all while framing it as protection of the faith. So when a Spanish widow connected to the highest levels of colonial government was suddenly accused of practicing something that sounded remarkably similar to local folk healing, it collided two separate anxieties at once. There was the imported European fear of witches making secret pacts with dark forces. And there was the colonial administration's ongoing effort to police any form of unsanctioned spiritual practice, whether indigenous or otherwise. Doña Inés was caught directly in the crossfire of both. It is worth pausing here to notice something else remarkable about this case. Most stories about witchcraft trials from this era, whether in Europe or in the colonies, center on poor, powerless women with no one to defend them. This case is different, specifically because of who Doña Inés was. She had status. She had a late husband who once governed the entire colony, and she was still investigated on two separate legal fronts by two separate authorities at the exact same time. That detail alone suggests that whatever was happening inside this case went far beyond simple superstition. Someone with real influence wanted this pursued, and wanted it pursued hard enough to run parallel investigations rather than waiting for one process to finish before starting another. According to some surviving accounts drawn from the broader investigation into sorcery cases handled during this period, the people ultimately implicated, including a colonial official and his wife, alongside Doña Inés and her household, were found guilty and required to pay fines along with the costs of their own trials. No dramatic execution. No public spectacle at the stake. Just guilt, financial punishment, and then silence. As the paper trail quietly disappeared into archives scattered across two continents, waiting centuries to be pieced back together. That quiet ending might actually be the most unsettling part of the entire story. There was no dramatic climax, no moment of vindication, no clear resolution explaining exactly what really happened inside that household in 1580. Just a disappearance of key records, and a woman whose reputation was permanently altered by an accusation. By an accusation that modern historians still cannot fully untangle from political maneuvering. What this case leaves behind is not a neat, satisfying legend. It is something closer to an open wound in the historical record, a reminder that the earliest years of Spanish rule in the Philippines were shaped just as much by human ambition, rivalry, and fear as they were by faith or law. Doña Inés Álvarez de Gibraleón was never burned at a stake. There was no dramatic public execution to make her story easy to package into legend. Instead, her case survived only in scattered documents, half preserved in Mexico, half lost to a mysterious disappearance in Manila, which is precisely why almost no one today has ever heard her name. And that raises an uncomfortable question that reaches far beyond one widow in one small 16th century colony. How many other accusations like hers were quietly filed away, weaponized by people in power, and then simply left to vanish once they had served their purpose? Doña Inés survived what she was accused of, at least in the sense that she was not put to death. But survival is not the same as justice. And her case remains one of the clearest surviving examples of how the fear of witchcraft could be turned into a tool of political convenience. In the earliest days of a colony still finding its footing, 4 centuries later, her story sits mostly in academic journals and archival footnotes, far from the public eye, overshadowed by louder, more sensational witch legends from other parts of the world. But the documents are real. The 2 parallel trials are real. The vanished civil case file is real. And the picture they paint together of a governor's widow caught between colonial law, indigenous tradition, and personal rivalry deserves to be remembered as one of the earliest and strangest chapters in the story of witchcraft accusations in the Spanish Pacific. A chapter that history very nearly succeeded in erasing completely.